Inside a women's prison, what cameras were never meant to capture. Don't miss out on more true crime stories. Hit subscribe, like, share, and join the conversation in the comments. The moment the cameras were never meant to capture came with a harsh click of a cell door at the Federal Bureau of Prisons women's facility in Dublin, California. Inside one of the dormitory wings, investigators uncovered evidence of guard-on inmates' sexual misconduct, hidden in plain sight. A medical examination room where a correctional officer had repeatedly abused female prisoners, and surveillance logs showing blank hours when the lights were off and no one entered the space. The officers had lulled the women into trust by offering gum, tobacco, or the promise of extra privileges, an abuse of power behind bars. The footage of that container room, once undisclosed, showed a system bending towards secrecy. And then the federal investigators found the memo. Internal warnings flagged the officers' behavior years earlier, but corrections leadership ignored them. The door stands ajar now, the implications immense, and the question remains: how many inmates were violated? How long did the cover-up last? And who will be held accountable? Stay with us, because what's about to unfold will shatter more than just one institution's reputation. From here we go back to the beginning. Before the scandal erupted, the women inside the facility were serving sentences for crimes of many kinds: nonviolent drug offenses, theft, parole violations, but all had one thing in common: vulnerability in a system designed for punishment, not protection. One of the victims, we'll call her Maria, entered the prison after a small-time drug conviction. She left behind a young daughter, a frail father, and a promise to turn her life around. In her intake photo, she looked determined, hopeful. But inside the walls, the signs of danger arrived gradually. The dorm lights flickered, cameras rarely angled toward the shower, and small group therapy rooms. Guards made offhand comments like, "You know how the rules work," and women traded whispered stories of how one guard helped you if you needed extra commissary items, and then asked for something in return. Maria, in her first weeks, asked for help getting a transfer closer to home. A guard overheard. The next day, she found her bunk assignment changed, her commissary limited. She worried, but didn't speak up, because speaking up meant retaliation. Investigation documents later showed dozens of complaints filed by female inmates who said they were isolated after reporting misconduct. The atmosphere was oppressive. Some women were in grief, others in shock. They'd come to serve time, not to become prey. Outside, families visited through glass partitions, hearing secondhand worries. The cameras weren't in that wing. One mother wrote in a letter, "Behind locked doors, the power dynamic shifted, and when the internal memo finally surfaced, flagging earlier reports of misuse, the game changed." A new extreme moment arrived. Investigators discovered that the so-called medical room had no camera at all for entire days. The door had been kept locked, visits logged as administrative, and the staff entries erased. That revelation sent shockwaves through the prison system and raised the stakes. If one room can be hidden, what about all the others? The day the investigation went public, the Dublin Federal Correctional Institution became the center of national outrage. Cameras lined the perimeter fences, news crews shouted questions, and federal agents carried boxes of documents out of the prison gates. Inside, silence ruled. Inmates whispered through vents, wondering if the officers who had once controlled every second of their lives would now be wearing cuffs themselves. The Department of Justice confirmed what the women had been saying for years. Guards, including a former warden, had been accused of using their power to exploit inmates. The story exploded across every major outlet. But behind the headlines were women still afraid to speak, terrified that the people who promised to protect them were still walking the same halls. Investigators found disturbing patterns buried in digital logs and staff emails. Supervisors had approved overtime shifts that put accused officers back on duty, often in the very units where the complaints originated. Internal affairs investigators had closed cases without interviewing victims, labeling them unsubstantiated. A federal prosecutor described it bluntly. This wasn't one bad actor. It was a culture of silence. The FBI began gathering statements, but each interview carried risk. Some inmates said they were transferred to other facilities after speaking up. Others said they were threatened with losing their phone or visitation privileges. Maria finally decided to cooperate. During her interview, she described how one guard, the same one later indicted, controlled her housing assignment. He told her, "Be good, and you'll get home sooner." That promise became the weapon that trapped her. When she realized she wasn't the only one, she agreed to testify. Her bravery helped investigators piece together a timeline of years-long abuse covered by falsified reports. The details painted a chilling picture. Surveillance cameras turned off, paperwork altered, incident logs rewritten to remove names. It wasn't only abuse, it was deliberate concealment. By late 2022, the Department of Justice charged multiple correctional officers, including the warden, with federal crimes of sexual misconduct and obstruction of justice. For the first time, the victims felt heard. But justice inside a federal prison moved slowly. Court hearings were postponed, witnesses relocated, evidence reviewed and re-reviewed. Maria's letters to her daughter grew shorter, her handwriting shakier. She worried that telling the truth might mean losing what little peace she had left. Outside, advocates demanded full reform of the women's prison system, calling it the rape club, echoing what some inmates had told reporters. Congress opened inquiries, but inside those cold, blue-lit corridors, the power imbalance hadn't yet shifted. One evening, as federal monitors prepared for a follow-up inspection, the prison's entire camera network suddenly went dark for nearly 3 hours. Every screen in the control room went black. And when the system came back online, the room that started it all appeared empty. The evidence shelf that once held the sealed files was gone. When the cameras flickered back on that night, the air inside Dublin Federal Correctional Institution felt electric with fear. Agents arrived before dawn, flashlights cutting through the blue haze of the cell blocks. Someone had wiped the digital archives clean, weeks of surveillance footage gone. The disappearance was no accident. Investigators knew it was sabotage, but by whom? The women inside whispered again through the vents. They're covering their tracks. Federal prosecutors pushed harder, and soon, the truth unraveled. A mid-level corrections supervisor had granted unauthorized system access to another officer, an officer later linked to one of the indicted guards. It was an inside job meant to delay justice. The discovery ignited fury in Washington. Lawmakers demanded immediate oversight, calling the prison a symbol of systemic rot. The Department of Justice ordered emergency transfers of vulnerable inmates, and for the first time, outside monitors were stationed inside the facility full-time. The blue corridors, once silent, now echoed with the footsteps of investigators and journalists chasing answers. Maria and other survivors were moved to protective housing. Their testimonies, once whispers, became the backbone of a historic federal lawsuit. During hearings, they described the fear, the retaliation, and the desperate attempts to be believed. The courtroom was cold and quiet when the verdict finally came. The warden and multiple officers were convicted of federal civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. But even victory felt heavy. Some women had already served their sentences, leaving without seeing justice delivered. Others struggled to rebuild their lives outside, haunted by what happened behind those walls. Years later, the story of Dublin FCI reshaped how America looked at women's prisons. New legislation demanded external oversight, body cameras for staff, and independent complaint hotlines. Advocates called it a first step, not a fix. For the survivors, change came too late, but their courage forced the nation to confront what it had ignored for decades. Today, the old cell block where the scandal began remains sealed, the medical room empty and stripped of its door. During a recent inspection, one of the new wardens reportedly paused there, staring at the bare floor. The faint hum of security lights filled the space, a reminder of how silence once hid crimes in plain sight. Outside, Maria stood at a bus stop with her release papers, the morning sun cutting through gray clouds. She looked back only once, at the distant fences and towers, and then forward. Her voice, steady but quiet, carried the last line of her interview. They took our freedom twice, but this time, the world saw it happen.